was Queen Elizabeth's rebellious little sister. Princess Margaret on Meet the Royals, hosted by Davy Jones. Next on A&E.
Here they come, walking down the street. They get the funniest looks from everyone they meet. Hey, hey, meet the Royals. They're nothing like you and me. Loaded with power and money, and chased by the paparazzi. Hey, hey, meet the Royals. Hey, hey, meet the Royals.
Ah, behold the bewitching Princess Margaret. But beware, behind the beauty lurks a bit of a beast. Hey, hey, Davy Jones here. Scandals, lovers, reckless partying. Why, oh why does this keep happening with the younger royal siblings? Welcome to Meet the Royals, where we take you inside the palace walls to see what it's really like to be a royal. The perks, the protocol, and the party animals. It's not in their blood, it's in their upbringing. Strolling Margaret's princess slippers for a bit, you might understand why she was born to be wild.
Princess Margaret was a pretty child who became a stunningly beautiful woman.
I think that Margaret's life was one of unfulfilled promise, since all that was offered to her was wealth, status, and position. There was not a very happy future.
Princess Margaret was a party animal. She glowed.
Many people say that Princess Margaret had a talent for choosing the wrong lovers.
The rows were terrible between them, the shouting and the screaming.
He was 25 and she was 43, and she just fell for this young man instantly.
How did this brainy bombshell become such a princess with attitude? Just sit back on your gilded thrones and you'll see as we meet the royals.
It's a summer night in 1930. At Glamis Castle in Scotland, a violent storm beats against the ancient stones. It drowns out the cries of a woman in labor. The product of that labor, Princess Margaret, is a grandchild of the King of England. Even as a toddler, she charms the guys, and she quickly becomes the apple of the king's eye.
George V would carry her around on his back like a bucking bronco. This is the King of England, emperor of half the world.
In 1930, Britain rules the greatest empire the world has ever seen. Being of royal blood is a very posh deal for Margaret and big sister Elizabeth. The finest clothes, a big house in London. Elizabeth is very well behaved. Margaret's kind of a holy terror.
Incredibly bright, incredibly mischievous, loved to jump out on footmen and shout boo and hope they'd drop the tray or whatever.
The British press adores this sassy little girl. When she's 5, her life changes dramatically. Her beloved grandpa, King George V, dies. Now, her uncle Edward is king. But Eddie's in love with a divorced woman, and the royal rulebook says royals can't marry divorcees. So he quits his job. Suddenly, Margaret's dad is on the throne. Long live King George VI. Their family has hit the jackpot, and the princesses move to Buckingham Palace.
Good old Buckingham, 600 rooms, but no jacuzzi.
Mom and Dad may be king and queen, and there's a nanny, a nursery maid, and a governess, but they're still hands-on parents.
It was the warmth of the upbringing that was different. They always had access to their parents.
This makes great PR, and the press gobbles it up.
Tea time was absolutely sacrosanct when they'd all sort of sit around the fire and play games.
George VI is a great playmate because he's haunted by memories of his own nasty father. calls Elizabeth his pride, but Margaret is his joy. And he knows it'll be a bummer for her when Elizabeth becomes queen someday.
He said to his daughter, I understand about being second best. He spoiled her utterly. She could have anything she wanted in an empire.
The princesses even have their own kid-sized castle. The only thing Margaret's parents blow off is her education.
She was intelligent, and an intelligent royal is, by and large, a pretty rare occurrence.
These royals worry that women who show they're smart will turn eligible men off. So Margaret's tutors teach her only feminine subjects, like music, dancing, and drawing.
She was one of the cleverest women I've known, but with no sufficient outlet for that intelligence.
She was being trained to cut the ribbons at hospitals and schools and smile for the press.
When Margaret is 9, World War II breaks out. Nazi pilots bomb London night after night. Other parents ship their kids to the safety of Canada, but the princesses stay put. They'll show the world Brits are not afraid of bombs. The press treats the royal family as heroes, especially when Buckingham Palace is bombed. To bolster British spirits, 14-year-old Elizabeth broadcasts an uplifting message.
When peace comes, remember...
And introduces her little sister.
My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
Princess Margaret once said to me that she was brought up in a world of men, because during the war they were surrounded by all these troops there. They were, in a way, incarcerated in Windsor Castle.
One of the men is a pilot and war hero, Group Captain Peter Townsend.
Hey, keep your eyes on Group Captain Townsend. Margaret certainly does.
Townsend's not only a hero, he's a perfect gentleman. Tall, handsome, even modest.
When Peter Townsend went to his first meeting with the king, the two princesses were determined to see him because he was a very glamorous figure. And they both peeped at him and were very taken with him.
Finally, the war ends. The good news for Princess Margaret is that she gets to leave the palace and celebrate with ordinary people.
We were all dressed down, and everybody was in uniform. Anybody who wasn't in uniform looked out of place.
The bad news? Well, this 15-year-old now has no purpose in life. The royals have no role for a kid sister who won't ever be queen.
With princes with sons in the royal family, they go into the army, most of them, or they go into the navy, they go into the forces. They have some kind of career. No one knew what to do in those days with a princess.
She'll be a little lost princess for the next half-century, making obligatory royal appearances and looking for fun. Of course, when you're bored, there's always travel. In this case, an endless tour of South Africa. The beautiful princess is schooled in charm, but sometimes she forgets her manners.
There was a story about one African chief who'd made a tremendously long speech. He went on and on and on. And then I think he'd either lost his place or some interruption, and he started all over again from the beginning, and she gave this tremendous groan, which she really shouldn't have done.
Margaret's favorite souvenir of South Africa is Peter Townsend. Remember him? He's still on the palace staff. Group Captain Townsend and the princess take long rides through the gorgeous South African countryside. Romance is in the air. Oh, by the way, Peter's a married man, so there's trouble ahead.
Meet the Royals. Brought to you in part by the Principal Financial Group.
Waiting on VHS for only $24.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-423-1212 or visit aetv.com.
Hey, hey, welcome back to Meet the Royals here on A&E. Princess Margaret's father was King George VI. Before he was King George, he was Prince Albert. Then suddenly, upon being crowned, his name changed. Now, how does that sort of thing happen? Well, here's the story. He was crowned king in 1937 when the Nazis were becoming a menace, and Albert apparently sounded a bit too German. Bad show and all. His full name was Albert Arthur Frederick George, so they stuck the George in front, and the rest is royal history.
Princess Margaret was a party animal. She glowed.
By the time Margaret turns 20, she's got a rep as a major league partying princess. Nothing like her staid parents or her straight arrow sister. She drinks, she smokes.
Dawn would be breaking in the rearview mirror before she got back home.
She'd become the nightclub queen of England. She would make whoever had been selected that evening to be her escort, he would pay. Margaret never spent a penny of her own money, ever.
But why should a princess pay? She's beautiful, she's bewitching, and she's single. Unlike big sister Elizabeth, who's gone and married the very unhip Prince Philip. Margaret becomes a perfect lure for paparazzi. They swarm like honeybees around her and her suitors.
She had enormous charisma.
She had this indescribable thing known as star quality.
She also still has her eye on Peter Townsend.
Her pursuance of Townsend developed into what would be considered today almost sexual harassment. She would demand that he go riding with her. No matter that he was in the middle of doing something with his wife, she would deliberately run a horse alongside his so that her leg could touch his.
In 1952, the inevitable happens. Peter Townsend divorces his wife. That same year, Margaret's father dies. His death delivers a terrible blow to Margaret. She'd loved him deeply. She fills the vacuum by turning more and more to Townsend.
She went to her sister, the new queen, and said that she and Peter Townsend were very much in love and they'd like to marry.
This is not just a sisterly chat. Royals like Margaret need the Queen's permission to wed. But Elizabeth is in no hurry to give it because, remember, royals shouldn't marry divorcees. Till now, the affair's been hush-hush. But then comes Elizabeth's coronation.
Princess Margaret, looking absolutely stunningly beautiful and radiant, sort of rushed up to Townsend, and there was a tiny sort of speck of fluff on his uniform, and she just flicked it off like that. And it was such a wifely gesture, and the body language was so obvious that something that had been terribly private suddenly became frightfully public.
It's a headline writer's dream. The palace swings into action. While Margaret's on a tour of Rhodesia, Townsend is sent packing to a minor diplomatic post in Belgium.
He was given, I think, a little under 2 weeks to pack up and get himself ready to go to Brussels.
He was banished.
The grim news reaches Margaret in Africa.
There was this tremendous scene where Princess Margaret refused to go on with any of her duties. She was really very, very upset, very angry about the fact that he'd been sent off without her prior knowledge.
So does she give up? No way. She's the royal black sheep.
Princess Margaret all her life has wanted something that's a little bit racy and risque, and I think the group captain supplied that aspect which her more ordinary, well-bred friends could never achieve.
But her illicit love strains her family bonds. Her big sister buries herself in queenly duties. And her mother, the Queen Mother, simply avoids the subject.
The Queen Mother has this wonderful serenity because if things go wrong, she tends to look the other way, to turn her back. And when this whole business of Townsend blew up, the Queen Mother simply couldn't bring herself to talk about it.
In 1955, Peter returns to England for a short visit, and there's a hailstorm of press coverage. Might they reunite? No way, says the establishment.
Politicians, church leaders, palace advisors, and the royal family all got together to decide what should happen. And all of them, it was a unanimous front. None of them wanted her to marry Townsend.
I would like to believe that the Queen was tortured by being required to do this. I can't imagine she wasn't.
Margaret is warned, if she marries, she'll have to leave England, permanent exile. She won't be a royal highness anymore. She'll be plain Mrs. Peter Townsend and live on his modest income. Margaret's response? Forget about it.
She enjoyed being a princess. She once said to someone that I can't think of anything more wonderful than being what I am. This is a princess with every dress was paid for, every car was chauffeured, she had whatever she wanted.
Margaret's savvy. She knows who butters her crumpet. She and Peter draft a formal renunciation of their love. Of course, it ends up as front-page news. Mindful of the Church's teachings that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before others.
Or in other words, luxury before love. Toodaloo, Peter.
He zips off on an 18-month journey around the world. She's left alone in her royal flat.
A sad, sad moment. Especially, you must remember this, that Princess Margaret lived to see many other royals divorce and remarry. And how could she not think to herself, why was I disallowed this?
The British public takes her side, and they say it with flowers.
You could hardly get into the house for the amount of flowers. Masses and masses of little bunches from people like taxi drivers just saying, "We're with you, Margaret," or "Good luck."
Things may look bleak, but you know Margaret. Before those bouquets even wilt, the merry princess is off and running. Once again, she rules the nightclubs, drinking and smoking and driving her friends to exhaustion.
I've attended many dinners and banquets at which one of the waiters tasks, their only task of the evening, is to make sure that her whiskey glass is permanently topped up.
By protocol, no one can leave these soirees before Margaret, and she parties till 3 in the morning. But at age 25, this hard-charging beauty is beginning to scare off potential mates.
Margaret had these piercing, fabulous blue eyes, and people got to recognize the Margaret I want something look. Whenever she'd started to look in that particular way towards them, they were terrified.
Fast forward to a February night in 1958. At a dinner party, Margaret meets a talented photographer, Anthony Armstrong Jones.
They both had a great deal in common. They had a love of the theatre, a love of the ballet, a love of many, many things.
Unlike Margaret's last major fling, Tony's not married, not divorced. He's really, truly single. And he's really, truly cool, with a flat in an artsy part of London and a secret love nest by the Thames.
Even their closest friends did not know that they were seeing one another.
Soon, she's eating Tony's homemade meals and drinking his cheap wine.
She would go there sometimes on the back of his motorcycle, wearing a headscarf and a jumper, not looking at all like HRH Princess Margaret.
You go, girl.
For the path of royal romance to run smoothly, you have to be a master of disguise, whether you're a prince or a princess. When Prince Andrew was dating the American actress Koo Stark, he often used to dress as a milkman or as a traffic warden. And during her romance with the heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, Princess Diana used to wear a wig so that they could queue outside his favourite jazz club and no one had a clue who she was. Made a bit of a change from her courtship with Prince Charles. During their romance, she called him Sir.
Tony's love for Margaret was not disguised at all.
Where Anthony Armstrong-Jones was concerned, they were head over heels in love with one another.
Their relationship is passionate. One friend says it's about sex, sex, sex. But will they tie the knot? Would you believe it's old flame Peter Townsend who decides their fate? He sends Margaret a letter saying he's about to marry a gorgeous 19-year-old Belgian. Well, two can play that game. The royal family thinks Tony's a strange choice for a mate. An artist? What about a real man who wears tweeds and kills foxes? But
she was also reaching the sort of age where everybody actually wanted her to marry, and if she happened to choose somebody like Tony Armstrong-Jones, I think they thought, well, that's preferable to not getting married at all.
She'll get married and she'll get revenge. Revenge against the establishment by marrying an artsy photographer.
It allowed her to kind of cock a snook at the establishment. She was, in a sense, getting her own back from the way they had treated her over Peter Townsend.
For Armstrong-Jones, Margaret's quite a catch. Beautiful, spunky, rich. But Tony's mates are worried.
They knew he was quite the wrong sort of personality for court life, for that restricted life that you have to lead in court.
Obviously, her role was always going to be superior to Tony in that hierarchical setup of the royal world.
In the end, Tony's friends bury their doubts and dress up for the wedding, which is spectacular. So spectacular that Parliament has a snit about the $60,000 it costs the government. The press gushes. Perhaps we had never known how beautiful she is. But after they sweep the rice from the floor of Westminster Abbey, will artsy Tony be able to hack it with the Tony Royals?
Why do we work? Why do we get up every day and go to work? Because we make things, fix things, send our kids off to learn things. At the Principal Financial Group, we know you don't just work to retire, you work to live. That's why we give people the financial tools to help them keep more of the money they make and do more with the money they spend.
Now available.
Meet the Royals here on A&E. Today on Palace P's and Q's, dining with the Queen. Now let's get some advice from our own etiquette queen, Victoria Mather.
Always, when in doubt, watch your hostess. They do say strange things, actually, quite often at the royal tables. Quite often husbands and wives sit next to each other, which I think is ghastly. I mean, why would you want to sit next to your husband or your wife? You see them the whole time. It must be so bored of them.
Ghastly indeed. Now, seriously, what is the worst gaffe that I could commit at the Queen's dinner table?
Probably being sick into your plate, do you think, or falling asleep in the soup, or getting blind drunk. But the glasses are quite small. I mean, the alcohol's sort of quite rigidly controlled.
Do you have any other advice, you know, like for me?
Well, don't drink out of the finger bowls. Although there was an instance with Queen Victoria.
Someone drank out of Vicky's finger bowl? What on earth did she do?
Queen Victoria took a look and thought, and then did the ultimate polite thing. She took her finger bowl and she drank from it as well. So I think the Queen can outmaneuver. She's been brought up to outmaneuver anybody on manners.
All part of a day's work, I guess, when it comes to being a queen.
It's now the 60s, and London rocks. Princess Margaret and Tony Armstrong-Jones fit right in as Britain's smartest couple.
She was the Diana of her day. She was bigger than Diana. And so wherever she went, there'd be crowds.
They hobnob with celebs from showbiz and the arts, like these four blokes from Liverpool. John Lennon calls her priceless margarine.
She loved to invite everybody that was currently in the flow of things to the Kensington Palace, and she used to have wonderful parties there.
When you're a royal, you can keep partying. You don't have to change dirty diapers. So their kids, David Viscount Linley and Lady Sarah, don't slow their pace a bit. How do the children get titles when their dad's just Mr. Armstrong-Jones? Well, he isn't anymore. The clever princess has lobbied for a title, and Tony's now Earl of Snowdon.
To begin with, I think he rather enjoyed it, but I think eventually he got rather bored with the royal protocol.
He did not want and did not fit in to the role of Mr. Princess Margaret.
As for fitting into the royal family,
Prince Philip did not like Armstrong-Jones, referred to him always as that bloody man, didn't think he was a manly enough man.
Mr. Margaret buries himself in his work. His photography, his TV documentaries, even his design for this aviary. But after work, he still must toddle home to the boss.
He couldn't take her arrogance and her having to be right all the time and her timekeeping. Everything happened to her time. He could be down for lunch an hour before her, but he wasn't served until she came down. And she expected him to do as he was told.
Royals just can't hack the give and take of normal relationships. And why should they?
They've been brought up in this aura of adulation. Everything they say is taken notice of. They crack a joke, people fall about laughing. It's a very, very false life.
Behind the elegant walls of Kensington Palace, it's a nightmare.
The two of them would get drunk, they'd scream at each other in front of their friends. Some people started to refuse invitations to their home because they couldn't stand the atmosphere.
Tony was very good at being spiteful, being unkind.
So what does Margaret do to get back at Tony? What royal ladies have traditionally done. Other men. Like the brilliant comedian Peter Sellers, who says he's quite in love with Margaret.
May I present, ladies and gentlemen, my impersonation in 11 seconds flat, before your very eyes, of Her Royal Highness, Princess Margaret!
Sellers will do anything to impress her, including casting her in this fancy home movie, which costs him £6,000. Later, Sellers will brag they've had an affair. He even tells his son about one special night.
They had dinner, and then all the servants cleared everything up and beat a retreat and left them to it. And I think he thought to himself, my God, he said, I could end up in the Tower here. That didn't put him off, I don't think.
Cheeky Mr. Sellers.
When the going gets too rough, Margaret escapes from Tony to a Caribbean island. But she doesn't escape her royal ways.
For a picnic on the beach, Princess Margaret expected the guests to wear gloves. I mean, there's none of this, hello, Margaret or Maggie. I mean, absolutely, she would slap you down immediately, and it was, good evening, Your Royal Highness, and it would be a bow from the men and a curtsy from the ladies.
Behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace, formality reigns supreme amongst members of the royal family. When Prince Charles greets the Queen,
Your Majesty, Mummy,
he will formally bow to her and formally kiss her hand. When the royals meet each other privately, they bow and curtsy depending on their position in the royal pecking order. And it's one of the vagaries of royal protocol that the newest arrival into the royal family, that's Prince Edward's wife, the Countess of Wessex, well, she's now the most senior female royal after the Queen. And ironically, it means that the Queen's own daughter, Princess Anne, has to curtsy to the daughter of a used tyre salesman.
Margaret, the swinging mother of two, never forgets she's the daughter of a king.
Just get that sort of frosty look in her eye that sort of absolutely pinions you to the floor. And it can be quite devastating.
The princess herself doesn't have to play by commoners' rules, even with a guest who's married.
She was literally ruffling her hand through his hair. And then I heard a woman next to me sobbing. And I said, who's she? This was that man's wife. And of course, she was distraught because, again, with the formality of it all, you can't jump in and say, leave my man alone.
But even a princess can't ignore one thing: the royal code.
If you have any trouble at home, any kind of domestic friction, you keep this quiet. And this is what she and Snowden would do. They would try and present a facade to the public whereby there was nothing wrong.
When Margaret comes home from her solo tropical trips, Tony darn well better be there with a smile for the paparazzi. To the outside world, at least, nothing seems amiss. But time marches on, and even princesses show signs of wear. If they're over 40 and their only purpose in life is pleasure, it can spell trouble.
Meet the Royals is the only place you can get the lowdown on M versus M. Monkeys versus monarchy. Are you quite ready? Okay. Mike Nesmith always wore a hat in public, and so does Queen Elizabeth. Royalty's biggest hit, God Save the Queen. Monkey's biggest hit, a song that mentions da-da-da-da-da, homecoming queen. I sung those words a few times, I'll tell you. Finally, the Monkeys lasted 2 years on network television. The British royal family has an unbroken line going back 937 years. And it's probably because they never had a deal with the network executives. But I don't want to talk about that.
In 1973, unhappily married Margaret meets a young gadabout named Roddy Llewellyn at a party in Scotland.
It was at a time when she needed somebody to say, hey, you're pretty okay.
She looked at this young Adonis with the very good features, very handsome boy. Tall, rangy, everything she could possibly have dreamed of in a toy boy.
Roddy's about to turn 26. Let's see, 43 minus 26 makes 17. There's a 17-year difference between them. The affair transforms Margaret. She's been drinking like a fish.
That much whiskey, that much water.
She smokes too much.
60 cigarettes a day.
She's put on weight.
People don't like me when I'm fat, do they? She said, which I thought was rather poignant.
With a handsome young lover, that won't do.
Roddy brought back the life, the spark, the youth, the fun, everything that she valued. And I mean, you only had to look at her during that time to see how much better she was.
The lovers get away from it all on Margaret's Caribbean island. This is paradise.
It was a private island. I think she felt pretty safe there. Some of my colleagues attempted to get pictures and stories there, and they were singularly unsuccessful.
But then, a photographer posing as a tourist fires the shot seen round the world. It's tabloid heaven. The paparazzi run wild. Roddy tries his best to be discreet, even polite.
I'm sorry, I'm really not prepared to talk about my private life. I don't want to sound the least bit rude, but I'd rather leave it that way. Do you mind?
Meanwhile, Margaret's husband has been having his own affairs. But there's a difference. He hasn't been caught, which gives him a perfect way to finally shuck the princess and still come off the good guy.
I'm naturally desperately sad in every way that this had to happen. Margaret's comment in London was that it was the best bit of acting she had seen in her whole life, was Tony's tearful performance on television.
Yeah, that's a Tony winner for sure.
Desperately sad, desperately sad, desperately sad.
Airing such dirty royal linen in public ticks off Margaret's sister and her mom, but they're helpless to stop it.
They thought it was undignified for Princess Margaret to go off with somebody much younger than herself. The Queen was heard to say rather despairingly that she was worried by my sister's gutter-snipe life.
The affair continues. So does the bad press. In Parliament, the princess is described as a parasite. One of her sins, taking £14,000 from the government when she'd fulfilled only 8 public engagements.
Princess Margaret was doing next to nothing, and yet she was receiving considerable amounts of public money. And I was representing a lot of constituents who at that time were living on the breadline. You know, they couldn't afford a holiday at all, and there they saw this person swanning off to the Caribbean, not just once a year, but several times in the year.
Adding fuel to the fire, Roddy starts exploiting the publicity. He tries to launch a career as a pop singer. He croons on French television with Petula Clark.
I think they were really very deeply fond of each other. They both had the same kind of sense of humor and enjoyed music and probably other things as well.
What do you suppose she's thinking?
In 1978, the Snowdens finally call it quits, which throws more raw meat to the newshounds. It's the first divorce in the immediate royal family in more than 400 years, since Henry VIII dumped 2 of his wives.
Hey, Tony, be glad you weren't beheaded.
Free at last, Lord Snowden takes a new bride. This time, he knows better than to wed a royal. At least Roddy and Margaret are still an item. But how long will that last?
Tomorrow, Sebring.
Are you back? Are you comfy? Good. because Meet the Royals is ready with more here on A&E.
Soon after turning 50, Margaret notices Roddy's acting strange. She confronts him.
Margaret took him one side and said, look, this is very uncharacteristic. Why on earth are you being so rude to everybody and so unpleasant? And he said, because I've got something unpleasant to tell you. I'm in love with another woman called Tanya, and I'm going to marry her.
I think it hit her very hard.
I thought she was going to have a nervous breakdown of some kind.
But she's a classy dame. When she recovers from her nearly suicidal depression, she graciously invites Roddy and Tanya to lunch at Kensington Palace. Seeing her ex-lover again must make her wonder if all her dreams are made to be shattered. Ever since she met Peter Townsend, Cupid has ruled Margaret's life. But after Roddy Llewellyn ditches her, the god of love flies off for good.
She's had various escorts. She's been friendly with various men. I can't say exactly how close it is, but there's never really been another great love affair in her life.
Margaret still has her friends, but she's often a royal pain in the around them.
Most people consider Margaret to be the weekend visitor from hell, because she's very, very difficult. You've got to know what she wants to do, what she wants to play, how she wants to party, what she wants to eat, what she wants to drink, and everything must be done to her schedule.
Oh, behave, Margaret.
Well, if she likes you, she's an absolutely firm, steadfast friend, because she can decide she's not a friend anymore, and then you're out. Because they never change their mind, that family, once they've made a decision.
Speaking of that family, after the boy toy 86's Margaret, Elizabeth is delighted to see her back on the straight and narrow. And Margaret shows she's a loyal kid sister.
I have never heard her utter a single word of criticism of Her Majesty, and woe betide anyone who would dare to criticize the Queen in her presence.
The party animal also turns out to be a first-rate mom. She hasn't raised Lord Linley and Lady Sarah to be snooty royals.
She's given them the support and encouragement for that artistic streak that she was never given as a child herself. Lord Linley went off and became a carpenter. I mean, a master craftsman and makes furniture. And she absolutely was right behind him. I mean, you can't imagine that happening before in the royal family.
Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones also follows her own muse. She becomes a successful painter. But with the kids grown up, how does a middle-aged princess spend her time?
Fulfilling her patronages, her presidencies, her public life.
Now she's earning her keep with tons of official engagements, sometimes more than 300 a year. Some she loves, but mostly they're yawners she doesn't give a damn about.
I've often heard from people who have organized events where she had to come to be the guest of honor. And they say that she's been very brisk with them, that she's been, very unhelpful indeed, that she simply carries out her job and off she goes.
Now, Margaret's excessive habits begin catching up with her. Surgeons remove part of one lung. But mighty Margaret still keeps puffing away.
I chide her about smoking. That was the one thing that I did chide her about, that she just shouldn't smoke. I don't think she took much notice.
In 1998, she has a stroke. It's obvious that the party is almost over. In February 2002, 71-year-old Margaret suffers another stroke. and dies peacefully in her sleep.
Princess Margaret wanted a low-key funeral, which I have to tell you was very beautifully done. I've heard it said that Princess Margaret's life was unfulfilled, and I dispute that. Of course, there were periods of great sadness, great loneliness, profound unhappiness. But it was a fulfilled life. It was colourful, energetic, action-packed.
On the one hand, she is a princess, very conscious she's there to represent the monarchy. On the other hand, she wanted to be this freewheeling princess. She wanted to be arty, she wanted to be a party goer. So she's really never resolved these two parts of her nature.
You've got to give it to Margaret. Botched affairs, bad press, countless cigarettes and endless drinks, and she didn't seem to regret a thing. If you want to be a princess, you've got to take the tabloids with the tiara. It's not easy being purple. I'm Davy Jones, and you've been watching Meet the Royals.
I don't mind being the center of attention. And I know in this business, no matter how good you are, it always comes down to one thing. Your body.
Jill Hennessy is medical examiner Jordan Cavanaugh in Crossing Jordan. Next on A&E.